The night was calm, almost too calm, as if the whole world was holding its breath. Jerusalem had gone quiet except for a few distant footsteps and the soft whisper of the wind passing through narrow stone streets. It felt like the kind of silence right before a storm, heavy, expectant, almost painful. And in the middle of that silence, Jesus was praying. He wasn't surrounded by crowds. No miracles were happening around him. No cheering voices. No light from heaven opening above him. Just a man kneeling on the cold ground of Gethsemane, his hands pressed into the earth as tears mixed with sweat and rolled down his face. It was a moment of deep humanity, raw, honest, achingly lonely. Jesus knew what was coming. He could feel it pressing on him like a mountain. Betrayal,
Pain.
abandonment, the cross. Every beat of his heart seemed to whisper the same truth. The hour has come. He looked up toward the night sky, the olive trees swaying gently around him, and whispered a prayer that still shakes the human soul today. Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me, yet not my will, but yours be done. It wasn't fear that made him pray like that. It was love. A love so deep that he would walk into darkness for people who didn't even understand what he came to give them. The footsteps of betrayal. Suddenly, the silence snapped. Torchlight flickered through the trees. Metal armor clanged. Voices whispered orders as soldiers moved through the garden. And leading them was someone Jesus had once called friend. Judas. His face carried a strange mixture of determination and guilt. He avoided Jesus' eyes, like a man who can't face the truth of what he has done. The torchlight danced across his face, making him look older, harsher. He stepped forward, placed his hand on Jesus' shoulder, and greeted him with the kind of softness that broke the heart. Rabbi. Then the kiss. A symbol of love turned into a signal of betrayal. But Jesus didn't push him away. He didn't raise his voice. He simply looked deep into Judas' trembling eyes and said words that must have echoed inside Judas' soul forever. Friend, do what you came for. Even in betrayal, Jesus offered grace. The arrest. In seconds, the garden exploded into chaos. Soldiers rushed in, grabbing Jesus by the arms. Peter reacted the way many of us react when life hurts. He tried to fight, to fix things by force, cutting off a soldier's ear. But Jesus stopped him. He touched the wounded man and healed him instantly, even as that same man helped arrest him. That moment said everything about Jesus. He never stopped loving, even those who came to chain him. Dragged through the night, Jesus was taken through the dark streets of Jerusalem, pushed from one religious leader to another. The same city that had once welcomed him with palm branches now whispered against him in narrow alleys. Inside the high priest's courtyard, people spat accusations, twisted stories, half-truths, outright lies. None of it made sense, but none of it mattered. They had already decided his fate. Through all of it, Jesus stood silent. Not weak, not defeated, just calm, steady, surrendered. Like a man who knew the end of the story long before anyone else. When the high priest demanded, "Tell us if you are the Christ," Jesus lifted his eyes and spoke a simple truth. "I am." Those two words shook the room, not because they were explosive, but because they carried authority, the kind that exposes hearts and forces a choice. They tore their clothes in outrage. They called him a blasphemer. They demanded his death. Peter's tears. Outside, near a fire, Peter was watching everything from a distance. Fear gripped him so tightly he could barely breathe. When people recognized him and asked, "Aren't you one of his followers?" Peter denied it. Not once, not twice, 3 times. The rooster crowed, and in that heartbreaking moment, Jesus, tired, bruised, surrounded by angry voices, turned and looked at Peter, not with anger, not with judgment, but with a deep, aching sorrow. Peter's heart shattered. He ran into the night and wept like a child. Even in his suffering, Jesus carried the pain of those he loved. Before Pilate, at dawn, Jesus was taken to Pilate, the Roman governor. The crowd outside had grown, buzzing with tension. Pilate studied Jesus carefully. He saw no crime, no threat, no guilt. "I find no fault in this man." But the crowd roared. Anger spread like fire. People who had never met him demanded his execution. Pilate tried one last time. "Do you want me to release Jesus or Barabbas?" Barabbas was a violent rebel, a dangerous man. Yet the crowd chose him. "Crucify Jesus." The words rose like a storm, shaking the courtyard. Pilate washed his hands, pretending innocence, though everyone knew his decision sealed the fate of the innocent man standing before him. The whipping. Jesus was handed over to soldiers who treated him with cruelty that is hard to describe. They whipped him until his back was torn open. The Roman whip wasn't just leather, it had metal and bone woven into it, designed to rip flesh with every strike. Blood stained the ground. His breathing grew heavy. But he endured it, not because he was powerless, but because he had chosen love over escape. The crown of thorns. The soldiers mocked him, throwing a robe over his wounded body and pressing a crown of thorns onto his head. The thorns pierced through his skin, blood running down his face as they laughed and bowed sarcastically. "Hail, King of the Jews!" But Jesus didn't curse them, didn't threaten them, didn't even lift his eyes in anger. He simply took the humiliation for the sake of the world he came to save. The walk to Calvary. When they finally forced him to carry the cross, his body nearly collapsed under its weight. Each step was a battle. Each breath was a struggle. Some people watched in silence. Some wept. Others jeered. A man named Simon, pulled from the crowd, was forced to help him carry the cross. Imagine that moment, walking beside Jesus, feeling his blood on your clothes, hearing his labored breaths. The sky began to darken, even though it was still morning. It was as if creation itself sensed what was coming. Jesus reached the hill called Golgotha, the place of the skull, a place meant for death. The hill stood quiet, almost chillingly quiet, as Jesus reached the top. Golgotha wasn't the kind of place people wanted to visit. It carried a heavy smell of dust, sweat, and old death. Even the wind felt different up there, sharp, restless, almost grieving in its own way. Soldiers moved around with the cold efficiency of men who had done this too many times. They didn't look at Jesus as a teacher or a healer or the Son of God. To them, he was just another condemned man, another body to add to Rome's display of power. But there was something about his presence that unsettled even hardened soldiers. He didn't beg. He didn't curse anyone. He didn't resist or fight. There was a dignity in his silence, a strength that came from somewhere deeper than any human understanding. It was as if he had already accepted every moment that was unfolding. The cross laid on the ground. The wooden cross, rough, heavy, stained by the suffering of others, was dropped onto the dirt with a harsh thud. Jesus was guided toward it, his body trembling from exhaustion. His back was torn open from the whipping. His head still bled from the crown of thorns. Every step he took seemed like a miracle on its own. When he reached the cross, he didn't hesitate. He didn't ask for relief. He simply lowered himself onto the wood, stretching out his arms willingly. It was the most heartbreaking kind of surrender, one chosen out of love, not defeat. The nails. Most people imagine the nails as thin metal spikes. But Roman spikes were thick, brutal, designed to tear through bone if necessary. A soldier placed one nail against Jesus' wrist. Another soldier raised the hammer. For a moment the world seemed to pause. Then the hammer fell. The sound of metal striking bone echoed across the hill. Sharp, violent, unforgettable. Jesus gasped, his body shaking from the shock of pain. But no curse left his lips. No scream. Just a low, trembling breath. The second nail followed. Then his feet were placed together, and a final spike was driven through. Each strike felt like it didn't just pierce his flesh. It pierced the heart of every person who would one day hear this story. The cross lifted. Once the nails were secure, the soldiers lifted the cross upright. Jesus' body hung from the spikes, weight pulling down on his arms, making every breath a struggle. Crucifixion wasn't designed to kill quickly. It was meant to torture slowly. Death by exhaustion, suffocation, and unimaginable pain. As the cross slid into its hole in the ground, the jolt sent another wave of agony through him. His body sagged forward, blood dripping down the wood, yet his eyes remained open. He looked out over the crowd, not with anger, but with something closer to sorrow and compassion. The crowd below. People stood gathered at the base of the hill. Some watched in silence, guilt tugging at their hearts. Others mocked him, shouting insults as if their voices could drown out the truth of who he was. You saved others, save yourself. If you are the Son of God, come down from the cross. Where is your power now? Their words were sharp, careless, full of ignorance. But Jesus didn't respond with bitterness. Instead, he whispered something that stunned even the soldiers. Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing. Forgive them. Forgive the ones who nailed him. Forgive the ones who mocked him. Forgive the ones who condemned him. It was a kind of love the world had never seen before. The two thieves. Two criminals hung on crosses beside Jesus, one on his left, one on his right. They were men who had lived violent lives, men the world had already given up on. One of them joined the crowd, mocking Jesus. If you're really the Messiah, save yourself and us too. But the other thief saw something different. He saw innocence. He saw love. He saw a king who didn't need a throne. He rebuked the first thief, saying, "We deserve what we're getting, but this man has done nothing wrong." Then, with a shaky breath, he turned his head toward Jesus and whispered words that changed his eternity. "Lord, remember me when you come into your kingdom." Jesus, fighting for each breath, managed a gentle response. "Today, you will be with me in paradise." A criminal, a man with a past full of mistakes, a man society had thrown away. Yet Jesus welcomed him with open arms in his final hours. Grace extended until the very end. Mary at the foot of the cross. Among the crowd were faces Jesus knew well, his mother Mary, John the disciple, and a few loyal women who had followed him all the way from Galilee. Mary stood close, her heart breaking with each breath he struggled to take. This wasn't the little boy she once held in her arms. This was her son, hanging between heaven and earth, paying a price he didn't owe. Jesus saw her tears. Even in his agony, his love for his mother overflowed. He looked at John and gently said, "Behold your mother." And to Mary, "Behold your son." In those few words, he created a bond, a new family bound not by blood, but by love and care. Even on the cross, Jesus was still giving. Darkness at noon. Around midday, something strange happened. The bright sun dimmed. The skies darkened as if night had arrived early. People looked up, uneasy, confused. It wasn't an eclipse. It wasn't a cloud. It felt deeper, cosmic, spiritual. It was as though creation itself refused to shine while the Creator suffered. The darkness lasted for hours. A heavy, unsettling silence settled over the land. "My God, why have you forsaken me?" In the heart of that darkness, Jesus cried out with a voice full of anguish. My God, why have you forsaken me?" These words weren't a loss of faith. They were the cry of a son carrying the weight of the world's sin, a weight so crushing that for the first time, he felt the painful distance sin creates between humanity and God. It was the loneliest moment in history, the perfect son taking on the imperfections of the world. The final moments, Jesus' breathing grew slower. His body trembled under the strain. Every muscle burned. Every nerve screamed. He whispered, "I thirst." A soldier lifted a sponge soaked in sour wine to his lips. Jesus tasted it, then lifted his eyes slowly, almost peacefully. He wasn't defeated. He wasn't broken. He wasn't a victim. He was finishing the mission he came to accomplish. Then he said 3 words that changed the destiny of humanity. "It is finished." Not "I am finished," but it, the sacrifice, the redemption, the battle for humanity's soul, was finished. With one final breath, he prayed, "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit." And then he bowed his head. His chest fell still. The world felt the silence of a Savior who had given everything. The earth shakes. The moment Jesus died, the ground trembled violently. Rocks cracked open. The earth shook as if mourning the death of its creator. Inside the temple, far from the hill, something incredible happened. The veil, a massive curtain separating people from the Holy of Holies, tore from top to bottom. It symbolized one powerful truth. Through Jesus' sacrifice, the barrier between God and humanity was gone. No more distance. No more separation. The way to God was open. Even a Roman centurion standing guard at the cross felt the truth press into his heart. Watching Jesus die, he whispered, trembling, "Truly, this was the Son of God." The quiet after the storm. As the darkness lifted and the earth steadied, the crowd slowly scattered. Some left in fear. Some left in confusion. Some left with heavy guilt pressing on their souls. But a few remained close to the cross, still, silent, devastated. Jesus' body hung motionless. The hill stood empty and cold. It looked like the end. But heaven knew it was only the beginning. The hill of Golgotha had emptied slowly, like a candle burning down to its last flicker. The crowds were gone. The shouts were gone. Even the soldiers had grown quiet, packing up their tools with a kind of heaviness none of them fully understood. Something about this crucifixion felt different. The air itself felt changed. Jesus' body hung on the cross, still and silent. His head rested against his chest, hair sticky with dried blood. The wind gently brushed past him, as if nature itself refused to let him hang there alone. Mary and a few of the women stayed close, unable to leave. They stood with red, swollen eyes, hearts still unraveling from the weight of what they'd just witnessed. John remained too, his hands trembling slightly as he watched the final rays of day stretch across the sky. It was nearing evening, a detail that mattered deeply. The Sabbath was approaching. According to Jewish custom, no bodies could remain hanging on a cross once the sun began to set. And that's when a quiet, unexpected figure stepped forward. Joseph of Arimathea. Joseph wasn't one of Jesus' well-known followers. He wasn't a preacher or a fisherman. He wasn't in the inner circle. In fact, he was a respected member of the council, the very group that had helped sentence Jesus. But Joseph had something many others lacked: courage that wakes up when fear tells you to stay silent. He went straight to Pilate and asked for Jesus' body. It was a bold move. People would question him. Some might even hate him for it. But he didn't care. The one who had died on that cross deserved honor, dignity, and love. Pilate was surprised Jesus had died so quickly. Most crucifixion victims suffered for days. So he sent a centurion to confirm it. The soldier placed a spear into Jesus' side, and blood mixed with water flowed out, signifying death had already taken hold. With confirmation, Pilate agreed. "Take the body." Joseph took a deep breath, silently thanking God for this final chance to serve the Savior he had admired from the shadows. Taking Jesus down, the soldiers lowered Jesus from the cross with rough ropes, but the moment his body touched the ground, the mood shifted. Joseph moved closer. John came to help. Mary, though shaking, reached out to touch her son's arm, brushing away the dirt like a mother doing the simplest, most heartbreaking act of care. Jesus' body was cold. The wounds from the nails were deep. The crown of thorns had left marks all across his forehead. His back was torn, his feet bruised. Every part of him told the story of love in a language written with suffering. Joseph had brought fine linen. Nicodemus, another quiet follower, arrived too, carrying a heavy mixture of myrrh and aloes, nearly 75 pounds of it. It was an extravagant amount, the kind used for someone deeply honored. Together, they wrapped Jesus' body with care, layer after layer, mixing spices with linen, the scent of myrrh filling the evening air. The women watched through tears, memorizing every detail. Their hearts were breaking, but they couldn't look away. Love doesn't look away even when it hurts. The tomb. Joseph had a tomb nearby, new, untouched, carved into the solid rock. He had prepared it for himself, but that no longer mattered. He offered it for Jesus without hesitation. As they carried the wrapped body toward the tomb, the sky turned softer, colors fading into deep purples and blues. It felt like heaven was gently closing the day. The entrance to the tomb was cool, the air still. They laid Jesus on the stone shelf, smoothing the linen one last time. Mary stepped closer, brushing a whisper of her fingers across his cheek. Her heart felt like it might stop altogether. This was the son she had carried, fed, held, laughed with, prayed for. Now he lay still, wrapped in silence. Nicodemus placed the final strips of linen. Joseph lit a small oil lamp, letting its warm glow rest on Jesus' body before the tomb was sealed. Then, with a heavy push, they rolled a massive stone across the entrance. It scraped against the ground, echoing eerily in the quiet evening. The sound felt final. Too final. The women keep watch. Even after the stone was rolled shut, Mary Magdalene and the other women didn't leave. Their grief held them rooted in place. Sometimes they cried. Sometimes they fell silent. Sometimes they whispered prayers that drifted into the night like fragile threads of hope. They carefully noted where Jesus was laid. They planned to return after the Sabbath to anoint his body properly, to give him the care they couldn't offer now. For them, love didn't end with death. It couldn't. Once darkness wrapped around Jerusalem, they finally left. Slow steps, breaking hearts, tear-stained faces. The Roman seal. Meanwhile, the religious leaders feared something else. They remembered Jesus, saying he would rise on the third day. They didn't believe him, but they worried his disciples might steal the body and claim he had risen. So they went to Pilate again. "Place a guard at the tomb," they demanded. "Seal it so no one can get in." Pilate agreed. Soldiers marched to the tomb, posted guards, and placed a hard wax seal across the stone, Rome's symbol of authority. Anyone who broke it would face death. To them, this was just another assignment. To history, it was irony. They sealed the tomb of the one who would break every barrier death tried to build. The Sabbath silence. The Sabbath began. Jerusalem grew still. The markets were closed. Lanterns glowed softly in homes. Families sat together, sharing meals, whispering prayers. But inside every follower of Jesus, a storm raged. His disciples huddled in locked rooms, afraid soldiers might come for them next. Every corner felt unsafe. Every voice outside sounded threatening. Their minds were full of questions, confusion, fear, guilt, loss. Some whispered, "Why did this happen?" Others cried softly, "What do we do now?" A few repeated the last words he had spoken, letting them echo in their hearts. "It is finished." But no one understood what he meant.
Not yet.
Mary's grief. Mary, Jesus' mother, sat quietly in a corner, leaning against the wall as if her body had forgotten how to move. Her hands rested on her lap, clasped tightly. Every mother knows the weight of their child's pain. But Mary had carried the weight of a prophecy too, that her son would suffer because he was chosen. Still, no prophecy had prepared her for the sight of him on the cross. John stayed by her side. He knew she didn't need speeches or explanations. She needed presence. So he simply stayed, offering the gentle comfort of a friend who loved her son too. The silence in the tomb. Inside the tomb, darkness wrapped Jesus' body. The linen lay still. The spices filled the air with a quiet fragrance. To the human eye, nothing was happening. But in the unseen realm, everything was. Jesus wasn't dead in the way humanity understood death. His body rested, yes, but his spirit moved with purpose. He had entered the depths of death not as a prisoner, but as a conqueror. Old chains began to break. Old shadows trembled. The gates of darkness felt a shift they couldn't explain. It was the kind of silence that holds power. The kind of silence before sunrise. The kind of silence before a victory no one expected. He wasn't finished. Not even close. The disciples' long night. The disciples spent the night in fragments, half sleep, half sobs, memories flashing through their minds like restless waves. They remembered his miracles, his parables, his laughter, his gentle ways. The way he spoke with compassion few had ever shown. Thomas sat in the corner, angry at himself for running. Peter lay face down, still hearing the rooster's cry echo in his heart. Matthew tried praying, but the words kept slipping away. Andrew wiped his eyes, trying to be strong, but failing again and again. They thought the story was over. They thought all hope died with him. But hope, real hope, works differently. It blooms in silence. It breathes in waiting. It grows in the spaces where the world sees nothing. Heaven waits. As the world slept, heaven watched. Angels looked toward the sealed tomb with a fierce, joyful anticipation. They knew what was coming. They knew this wasn't defeat. It was the preparation for victory. But heaven waited, just as Jesus had said. 3 days. The countdown had started. Morning's approaches. On the second evening, Mary Magdalene sat awake, unable to rest. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw him, his smile, his kindness, his wounds. She whispered into the night, "I will go to him at dawn." She didn't know what she would do, didn't know how she would move the stone, didn't know how she would face the soldiers. She only knew she loved him, and love keeps showing up, even in grief. As she finally drifted into a restless sleep, the sky outside began to lighten, softly, gently, like the first breath before a miracle. Mary Magdalene's grief. Mary Magdalene woke before dawn. Sleep hadn't come easily. Her mind had played memories of Jesus like trembling lanterns in a storm. She had loved him not as the world gossiped or misunderstood, but with the devotion of someone who had been rescued, restored, and given back her life. He had spoken her name once, and something inside her had healed forever. Now she simply wanted to honor him, to anoint his body, to sit near him even if he was gone. Grief doesn't follow logic. It simply pulls you along. She wrapped her shawl tightly around her and stepped into the quiet streets. The air was cold enough to sting, but she hardly noticed. Other women joined her along the way, carrying spices and oils in small clay jars. Their footsteps echoed softly on the stone steps leading out of the city. No one spoke much. Words felt too fragile for the weight of their hearts. But one worry hung heavily around them. The stone. "Who will roll the stone away for us?" one of the women asked, her voice thin with worry. Mary didn't answer. She didn't know. She only knew she had to go. The soldiers at the tomb. At the tomb, the Roman guards stood watch through the night. The cold dew settled on their armor. Their torches had burned low, flickering with exhausted flames. Most of them were half asleep, leaning on their spears, expecting nothing but long hours of quiet. The giant stone sat in place, sealed firmly. No one had touched it. No one had come close. The world looked like any other morning, until suddenly it didn't. The earth shakes again. A tremor rose from the ground, subtle at first, then stronger. Pebbles shifted. Dust swirled. The guards jolted awake. Then the earth shook with a force that seemed to come from the heart of creation itself. The soldiers grabbed their weapons, fear crawling up their throats. The vibration wasn't like the quake on the day Jesus died. It felt purposeful, directed, like something was pushing through the fabric of the world. One soldier muttered, "What is happening?" Another whispered, "This is not of man." Before they could reach the stone, a brilliant light flashed across the tomb, bright like lightning, pure like the morning sun. They shielded their eyes, trembling. And then an angel stood beside them. Not a soft, gentle figure from paintings, not a childlike image, but a heavenly being whose presence made the earth bow and men collapse. His clothes shone like lightning. His face carried the glow of eternity. His feet touched the ground softly, as if even the earth honored him. The soldiers dropped their weapons. Some fell backward. Some fainted. Some froze with terror. Not one of them dared to lift a hand. The angel stepped toward the stone, and with one effortless motion, he rolled it away. The heavy rock that took several men to move now slid like a pebble in the presence of heaven. The empty tomb. Then, for reasons known only to angels, he sat on the stone. Calm, steady, almost peaceful. It was as if he was waiting for someone specific. The women arrive. Mary and the women approached the garden. Their steps slowed. Something looked wrong, or right, but they couldn't tell which. The guards, the stone, the strange glow near the tomb. Mary's heart pounded. Something happened, she whispered. When they saw the stone rolled away, their breath caught. The heavy rock lay to the side like it had been placed gently by unseen hands. Mary dropped her jar. No, no, someone has taken him. Tears blurred her vision. And then the angel spoke. His voice was firm but warm, like thunder softened by compassion. Do not be afraid. The women froze. I know you are looking for Jesus who was crucified. He is not here. He has risen, just as he said. The words fell over them like a wave, impossible and beautiful and overwhelming. Risen? Alive? Could it be? The angel stepped aside, pointing to the empty space inside the tomb. Come, see the place where he lay. Mary felt her knees weaken. The stone slab was empty. The burial cloths were folded calmly, untouched by panic. This wasn't the work of thieves. This wasn't chaos. This was order. This was purpose. This was God. But Mary's heart moved faster than her understanding. Jesus was gone. She needed him. She needed to find him. The angel continued, Go quickly and tell his disciples, he has risen from the dead. He is going ahead of you into Galilee. You will see him there. The women nodded, trembling. Some cried. Some laughed through tears. Some could barely breathe. They ran. Mary stays behind. But Mary couldn't leave. Her feet felt rooted in place. Her tears came fast, heavy, unstoppable. He was gone. Gone from the tomb. Gone from her sight. Gone from the world he had touched so deeply. She stood before the tomb, her sobs shaking her shoulders. She bent down to look inside again, as if hoping her eyes had tricked her the first time. But instead of an empty tomb, she saw two angels sitting where his body had been. They looked at her with gentle, knowing eyes. Woman, why are you crying? Trembling, Mary whispered, They have taken my Lord away, and I don't know where they have put him. Her voice cracked on the last word. The angels didn't answer. They simply watched her with an expression that hinted, Turn around. Mary felt someone's presence behind her. She turned, but her eyes, clouded by grief, didn't recognize him. A man stood there, quiet, steady, close. He asked softly, like he cared, Woman, why are you crying? Who are you looking for? Mary, thinking he was the gardener, begged desperately, Sir, if you've taken him, tell me where he is. I will go to him. Then came the moment heaven held its breath for. The man spoke one word, one simple word, her name, Mary. Her heart stopped. She knew that voice. She knew the warmth in it. She knew the way he said her name, with love, with kindness, with recognition deeper than blood. She gasped, Rabboni, teacher. She fell at his feet, overwhelmed, sobbing with joy. Jesus, alive. Jesus, before her. Jesus, reaching her through her tears. He smiled gently and lifted his hand. Do not hold on to me, Mary, he said softly, for I have not yet ascended to the Father. But go to my brothers and tell them, I am ascending to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God. Mary wiped her tears, heart racing with a new kind of fire, hope. She ran. Her feet seemed to fly. She didn't care who she passed. Her voice broke through the morning air. I have seen the Lord. The disciples in the locked room. Back in Jerusalem, the disciples sat together behind locked doors. Fear filled the air. They spoke in whispers, trying to understand the strange reports from the women. A knock at the door startled them. Then Mary burst in, breathless, eyes shining with joy they had never seen. He's alive, she said, almost laughing through tears. I saw him. He spoke to me. Jesus is alive. Some stared in disbelief. Some gasped. Some shook their heads, unable to process hope after drowning in grief. Could it be true? Could he be alive? They didn't know what to believe. But heaven was already moving toward them. Jesus appears. That evening, while the doors were still locked, a warm presence filled the room. A soft light, a stillness, and then Jesus stood among them. No sound of door hinges, no footsteps, just the sudden reality of him. They froze. His voice broke the silence. "Peace be with you." The words fell like balm on wounded hearts. Then he showed them his hands. The nail marks were there, real, healed, shining with something heavenly. He showed them his side, the place where the spear had pierced him. The disciples stared. Then joy erupted, pure, uncontrollable, tear-filled joy. They rushed toward him, touching his hands, hearing his voice, whispering his name with shaking lips. He was alive, really alive. He breathed on them gently and said, "Receive the Holy Spirit." In that moment, the fear in the room melted. The locked doors meant nothing. The darkness of Friday dissolved into the dawn of Sunday. Hope had risen, not as an idea, not as a symbol, but as a person. Jesus, alive, standing among them, speaking peace into their broken hearts. Thomas's doubt. But Thomas wasn't there that night. When the others told him, he shook his head. "I won't believe unless I see the marks myself," he said quietly. "Unless I touch his wounds." 8 days later, Jesus came again. Same room, same locked doors, same gentle presence. He looked at Thomas with soft eyes. "Put your finger here, see my hands. Stop doubting and believe." Thomas fell to his knees, overwhelmed. "My Lord and my God." Jesus smiled, placing a hand near his shoulder. "Blessed are those who have not seen and yet believe." He wasn't just speaking to Thomas. He was speaking to the world, to generations to come, to every heart reading this story, including yours, the beginning of something new. The resurrection wasn't just a miracle. It was the beginning of a movement that would spread across the world, carried by people who had once been afraid. Jesus ate with his disciples, walked with them, taught them, comforted them, restored them. Grief turned into joy. Fear turned into courage. Silence turned into purpose. And the stone that rolled away that morning still marks the greatest turning point in human history. Death had lost. Love had won. The sun had barely risen over Jerusalem that morning, yet the world already felt different. There was no thunder in the sky, no earthquake shaking the ground like the moment Jesus breathed his last, no soldiers running through the streets in panic. Everything looked almost normal, but nothing was normal. Not anymore. Not after the cross. And certainly not after what happened 3 days later. People were still talking, still trying to make sense of it all. Some were confused, some angry, some frightened. But there were a few, those who had followed him, walked with him, laughed with him, cried with him, who were carrying a strange mixture of heartbreak and hope, as if they knew something was coming but they just didn't understand it yet. Mary Magdalene was one of them. She hadn't slept much since the crucifixion. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw him on the cross, his head hanging, his body torn, that final moment when he said, "It is finished." The memory played in her mind like a storm she couldn't escape. But she kept holding on to his words, the ones he'd spoken so many times. "On the third day I will rise." Those words should have been enough to calm her. But grief makes it hard to think clearly. Sometimes it takes away even the hope you know is yours. Still, she woke before dawn, wrapped her shawl around her shoulders, and walked quickly to the tomb. The air was damp and cold, the world still wrapped in deep morning blue. She carried spices in her hands, one last act of love for the one who had changed her life. The path to the tomb felt longer today. Maybe it was the weight of sadness slowing her steps. Maybe it was the silence that seemed almost too heavy. But she kept going. She didn't know what else to do. Grief makes people move without thinking sometimes, like walking through a dream. And then she saw it. The stone. It wasn't where it should have been. It wasn't covering the entrance. It was rolled to the side. Her heart dropped. The spices slipped from her fingers and hit the ground without a sound. Who would do this?" she whispered, her voice breaking. She stepped inside, trembling. The tomb was empty. The place where Jesus had been laid, empty. His burial cloth, folded neatly in a way no thief would bother to do. Her grief turned into confusion, and confusion turned into panic. She stumbled back outside, tears blurring her vision. She didn't know where to run, who to call, or what to think. It felt like everything was falling apart all over again. She didn't hear the footsteps behind her right away. She was too lost in her fear. "Why are you crying?" The voice was gentle.
"Deep. Come."
She turned quickly, wiping her eyes. She saw a man standing there. She assumed he was the gardener. Who else would be in a place like this so early? "They have taken my Lord," she said through tears, "and I don't know where they've laid him. Please, if you moved him, tell me where he is." The man stepped closer. "Mary."
Just her name.
Spoken with the same tenderness she had heard so many times before. Her heart stopped. Her breath caught in her chest. Her knees almost gave way beneath her. That voice. She knew that voice. She looked again, really looked this time, and the world shifted. It was him, alive, standing right in front of her.
Whole.
Radiant.
Alive.
"Teacher," she cried, falling to her knees, overwhelmed by a wave of joy and disbelief so powerful she could hardly breathe. "You're alive." He smiled, the kind of smile that melts every fear, every doubt. "Go and tell my brothers," he said gently. "Tell them I am risen." Her tears now were tears of joy. She ran through the garden, through the paths still heavy with morning dew, her heart racing. The sorrow that had crushed her for days broke apart like a shell, replaced by pure, breathtaking hope. The disciples in the locked room. Meanwhile, the disciples had locked themselves inside a house. Fear had wrapped itself around them like chains. They were afraid of the Romans, afraid of the Jewish leaders, afraid of what might happen to them. Every sound outside made them jump. Every knock on the door made them freeze. And then Mary burst in, breathless, glowing, eyes shining with something they hadn't seen since before the cross. "I have seen the Lord," she said. Her words hung in the air like a spark waiting to be believed. Some looked confused, some hopeful, some terrified of hoping again. But before they could even respond, something unbelievable happened. Jesus appeared, not through the door, not through a window. He simply stood among them. "Peace be with you," he said. And in that moment, fear dissolved. He showed them his hands, the marks still there, scars that spoke louder than any sermon. He showed them his side. It was really him, not a spirit, not a vision, not a dream. Alive. Their grief turned into laughter, their confusion into worship, their fear into unshakable courage. Thomas and the touch of belief. But Thomas wasn't there. And when the others told him, he refused to believe it. Not because he didn't love Jesus, he loved him deeply, but because he had seen too much pain to hope so easily. "Unless I see, unless I touch, I will not believe." A week later, they were together again. The room was quiet. Thomas sat near the back, arms crossed, eyes tired. The others whispered, wondering what Jesus would do. And then once again he appeared. "Peace be with you." Thomas froze. Jesus walked straight toward him. "Thomas, put your finger here.
See my hands.
Touch my side. Do not doubt any longer, believe." The room fell silent as Thomas stepped forward. His fingers trembled. Tears filled his eyes. "My Lord and my God." It wasn't shame he felt, it was relief. A deep, overwhelming relief that settled in his soul like healing. The shore of Galilee. Some days later, the disciples were fishing on the Sea of Galilee. They worked through the night, but caught nothing. The sky turned a soft shade of gold as morning broke. A man stood on the shore, calling out, "Try the other side of the boat."
They did.
The net filled instantly, so full they could barely pull it in. John's eyes widened. "It's the Lord." Peter didn't wait. He jumped into the water and swam like a man desperate to reach someone he loved. Jesus had a small fire going on the shore.
Fish. Bread.
Warmth. A quiet morning. Come and eat. It felt like old times, like the days before everything fell apart. But there was one conversation Peter still feared. The conversation about his denial. After breakfast, Jesus turned to him gently. Peter, do you love me? Peter swallowed. Yes, Lord. You know I do. Feed my sheep. 3 times Jesus asked. 3 times Peter answered. 3 times Jesus restored him. It was his way of saying, your failure is not your ending. Your calling still stands. The Great Commission. For 40 days, Jesus appeared to them, taught them, comforted them. The disciples began to move with a different kind of strength, the strength of people who had seen death defeated with their own eyes. One morning, Jesus led them to a hillside in Galilee. The wind was soft, the sky clear. He stood before them with a calm authority that filled their hearts. All power in heaven and on earth is given to me. Go, therefore, and make disciples of all nations, and I am with you always, even to the end of the age. Those words burned like fire in their hearts. The Ascension. On another hill, near Bethany, he lifted his hands to bless them. As he did, something beautiful happened. The earth seemed to glow around him. Light wrapped around his body, not blinding, but warm and peaceful. And then he rose, slowly, gracefully, higher and higher. Their eyes followed him, hearts pounding, until a cloud covered him from sight. 2 angels appeared beside them. Why do you stand here looking at the sky? This same Jesus, who was taken from you into heaven, will return in the same way. His story wasn't over, and neither was theirs. The world changed because of the cross. After the ascension, something ignited inside the disciples. The fear that once paralyzed them was gone. They walked into the world with courage that shocked everyone who knew them. Peter preached with a power he never had before. Thomas traveled farther than any of them, carrying the message to distant lands. John spoke of love with a tenderness that touched broken hearts. Mary Magdalene shared the story of the empty tomb with a conviction that turned sorrow into hope for thousands. The world wasn't the same anymore. A new kind of light had spread across nations, across hearts. Because Jesus didn't just die. He rose. He lives. And he still changes hearts today. Your part in the story. The cross wasn't just a moment in history. It was an invitation, a rescue mission, a declaration of love. His resurrection wasn't just a miracle. It was a promise that no darkness has the final word. No sin has the final claim. No grave has the final victory. His story continues every time a lonely heart finds comfort, every time a broken soul finds healing, every time someone whispers, Jesus, I need you, and feels the warmth of his presence. He died for the world, but he also died for you, Amna, for your tears, your struggles, your wounds, your future. And he lives so you can live with hope. This is the ending of the story, and the beginning of yours.